Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Dion Geiger, and I'm the president of the Sterling Council. And we want to thank you all for being with us this morning to participate in this session that's going to help applicants who are or organizations that are wanting to look at the criteria and how to apply it to be more successful. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Bob Gorig, who is one of our master Sterling examiners. He's chair of our examination committee. He's on our board and just an all-around expert on the criteria and the process. And I want to ask Bob to introduce, he's going to be our host for the session, and he's going to be one of the presenters as well, but I want to turn it over to him and let him introduce his co-presenters and introduce the session. So thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Dion. Welcome, everybody. We're excited this morning to have with us Doug and Denise from Quiet Excellence to present this workshop for you. Before I introduce Doug and Denise, I wanted to do a commercial, first of all. Beginning on August 30th, the Sterling Council will begin a lunchtime series called Demystifying the Criteria, in which we will have a master examiner present the high points of each of the criteria items, 1.1 through 6.2. These are 15-minute lunchtime sessions that will begin August 30th and will occur once a week every Tuesday thereafter. Second thing is we are currently recruiting for examiners for the process coming up this year. If you are interested in serving as an examiner, and I know after you hear Doug and Denise speak, you'll be so excited you will want to serve as an examiner, please go to the Sterling website and register to be an examiner. We'd love to have you. So first of all, let me introduce Doug and Denise. Doug Serrano and Denise Haynes are the principals for Quiet Excellence, which is a firm dedicated to assisting organizations achieve excellence, performance excellence, and through the use of the Baldrige and Sterling criteria. Doug Serrano is retired from the Army as a colonel. He is an expert in strategic planning, having taught strategic planning at the Army War College. He also led the military's largest logistics agency into receiving the California State Program Award. Denise Haynes is a critical care nurse, and I believe has been a critical care nurse for at least 30 years. She is a black belt, a Six Sigma black belt, and has been working in the healthcare field and lots of other fields in helping organizations attain performance excellence. Doug and Denise are both master examiners with the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award Program and have been with that organization for 20 years or so. And Doug and Denise have assisted dozens of organizations, guided them through the process of applying for awards in not only Baldrige, but numerous state awards throughout the country. And so with that, I would love to turn it over to Doug and Denise, and they're going to give us some tips and tricks on how you can put your best foot forward so that you can achieve the best feedback once you submit your application.
Thanks, Bob. We appreciate that. Somebody's not on mute. We're getting a little echo. There we go. So we did present this at the Sterling program at the conference, and we appreciate if anybody was there. It's pretty much the same presentation. We did revise it just a little bit. Our intent today is to present for about an hour and then field questions. So if you have questions that arise as we're going through, please feel free to put them in the chat window. When we get to the end of an hour, we will also just, you can raise your hand and we'll go through questions and answers that way. We do have a lot of material. We pack a lot of material into our slides. We intend for you to be able to use the slides as references. And also at the very last slide is our contact information. If you do have other questions, we encourage you to contact us to get answers. That is just part of what we do. There's no fees for that or anything like that. We are always anxious to help organizations. And at this point, we really are focused on sharing our knowledge. So we decided to kind of make it a cute theme when we were talking about this for this presentation. As you may well know, Baldrige really uses a lot of, or applicants really use a lot of acronyms in applications just in order to conserve space. So we came up with this one of hints, information, and tips, and to help you hit your application out of the park. So this is just kind of what we're going to do. Again, we pack our slides with a lot of words, so hopefully they'll trigger your memory when you get look back on this presentation, so we don't read our slides to you. One of the big things we really want you to understand, though, is this piece about systematic. We want you to understand what the Sterling program and what Baldrige are looking for in not only applications, but also applicants. And really, we're going to talk a lot about the integration piece, because that's kind of one of the biggest struggles, is showing the integration in your application. So just a little bit of 101, we're pretty sure that you all know this. We use Sterling and Baldrige pretty much interchangeably, although we do know there are some differences, certainly in the programs, also in the criteria. But we do believe that both are really dedicated to this notion of performance excellence. And we put a little gold key here for you to understand and really internalize that Baldrige is looking for these three things. They're actually part of the law that's posted on the Baldrige website that was passed in 1987. And the first thing is to identify and recognize role model business practices. The second thing that's listed in the law is this piece about establishing criteria to help an external assessor evaluate your improvement efforts and really your level of being a role model business. The third thing, though, is really the one that we underscore, which is to disseminate and share best practices. So as Bob said, Doug and I have been doing this with Baldrige for over 20 years now. And we really truly believe that, in a nutshell, what Baldrige and what Sterling are looking for is somebody who can prove through their results that they're role model, and also very distinctly or very succinctly describe how they got those results in order to share these best practices so that other organizations can emulate.
Okay, so the basics of going through Baldrige is there's 6 process categories, there's 7 results items, which are tied to those processes. And we kind of want to put in your mind the concept of, if you're not satisfied with the results that you're getting in your organization, or there's a particular result that you want to improve, we hearken back to what was, for me, I think in 8th grade algebra. Now I think they're teaching it in pre-K, but there was this algebra equation that was called A plus B equals C. And that equation always resonated with me. And I'll just kind of throw this question out there to you, and I know you all know the answers, which is, if you want to change C in this equation, what must you do? Well, you must change either A or B, or both A and B. So we kind of liken our process improvement activities to just that, but we change the letters to P plus I equals R. And that is that your process plus the inputs to your processes equals your results. That's what produces your results. So if you're not content with the results that you have, then back to the equation, you must change either the process or the inputs, or both. And that's where the feedback from both your own internal organizational self-assessment for using the criteria, and external assessments from the Sterling program or the Baldrige program give you insight into those opportunities for what processes or perhaps the inputs need to be changed. So Denise talked briefly about what the programs are looking for, and this is, not just Sterling and Baldrige, but all performance excellence programs are looking for those organizations that can produce benchmark level results and can demonstrate how they got those succinctly. And that's the key word for the application writing, is to be able to describe your process succinctly to the point that someone else can look at it and say, you know, I can either use that exact process that they described, or I can modify it a little bit for my organization and make it effective for us as well. So the first step in putting an application together is, yeah, you got to read that criteria book. And sometimes that's a little tedious because they too pack as much information in there as they can. It's not, I think our expression is, it's not hard, but it is complex. Answering the Baldrige questions can take some effort in order to address all of the evaluation factors that are there. So it's important to understand, you know, the key things there is that there are basic and overall multiple levels of questions, and those are highlighted throughout the criteria book as such. And then from a writer's perspective is to understand that maturity model, which is a nice set of words for scoring guidelines, in what an approach is, what deployment means, what learning means, and what integration means. And so that you can include those descriptions in your writing of the application itself. It's important to understand the meaning of the key terms, and we start by preparing the organizational profile.
So the first thing is to really understand some of the lingo, and hopefully all of you have already gotten into this deeply enough, but it really never hurts. And in fact, even after all of our time, Doug and I still frequently go back to that glossary and look at the words and make sure that we're really, no kidding, following all of the words. So this definition of process, remember that program goal of disseminating and sharing the best practices is that when you're asked to describe a process in your application, go back and reread what you wrote and say, so based on what I just wrote, would I be able to emulate what I wrote in order to improve my results? Because again, the what's in it for me principle, what's in it for the programs, is really to help organizations be able to disseminate and share their best practices in order to help other organizations improve. Systematic is also a highly related term to process. Again, looking at the program goal to identify and recognize those role model businesses. Are you sure that you have really a role model process? Is it exhibiting the use of data and information? Has it been through some cycles of analysis and refinement? Is it well ordered and repeatable again, so somebody else could emulate it? And can you describe it well so that people go, yep, you know what, I could take that back to my organization and do that same thing or something similar, and my organization will be better because of it. Probably one of the biggest ones, and for me as an examiner, it took me a long time to really get this, is the definition of integration. And that is really what gets you into those higher scoring guidelines. I have kind of a music background and I get harmonization, but how you describe that, how you look at that. And then one day I was looking at this graphic out of the framework, and this is what's there under alignment. So the strategic and operational goals are a little bit fuzzy still. And you've got all these arrows, all the arrows are pointing in the right direction. And then mentally, I just kind of put silos over those and went, yep, you can have alignment, but still have your organizational silos. And so this integration piece is when there's a very clear focus on those strategic and operational goals. Everybody understands them. Everybody understands the way we're going to get there, the vision, the values, the whole bit. You don't have any more silos, and it's really about that holistic well-being of the organization. Now, I spent a lot of time in healthcare, and I embrace the fact that we humans are organisms. We certainly have a systems focus with the body. There's a lot of systems. The kind of the big six are listed here, and those are really the functional parts of the human body. Now my partner Doug likes to go to these conferences of healthcare people of these various specialties and say which one is the most important. Start describing them based on the most important, and of course everybody picks their own specialty, and then the whole conference dissolves into chaos. But not really. But there is some debate about which one is most important, and the point behind that is because none of these can survive or thrive without the others. So the same thing is true of your organization. Yeah, it doesn't have lungs and a brain, but it does have, measurement, it does have leadership, and it kind of works out that you've got these 6 that align quite nicely to the Baldrige framework. So part of what makes treating organisms so difficult is the same thing that makes writing an application so difficult. Anything that you describe or that you start to talk about or that you change in one aspect of your organization is going to create changes or responses in every other system in your organization. And embracing that and describing how you keep all of that integrated and in alignment and focus on the organization holistically is really what the programs are looking for in order for other organizations to be able to emulate, because that's really, really tough. And again, it's part of what makes putting it all in an application so difficult as well.
So if I can throw in a plug as well for folks in the audience that are not examiners, that there are so many great quotes out there from folks who have become examiners. One in particular comes to mind was the recently retired Commissioner of Education for the state of Kentucky, Dr. Terry Holliday, who at the time was the superintendent for a school district in North Carolina. And when he got that job, and I don't have the exact numbers, but essentially his school district was at the bottom of the pile in North Carolina in just about every significant metric that was there. Well, as the superintendent, he decided he was going to become an examiner. And the quote that's out there from him about that is that singularly becoming a Baldrige examiner was the best education that he got as a leader, and it's the best one that he knows. And so when you're writing an application, it's important to keep in mind, as in all of the rest of our organizations, we need to know who our customers are and what our customers' requirements and expectations are in order that we are able to produce the product or the service or the programs that meet those requirements and expectations. So when you're writing an application, essentially you have 2 main external customers, and the external customers to you as an applicant writer are the examiners that are going to review your application and the judges panel that will judge your application. Internally, your entire organization is a customer of your own application writing process, because your product, that application, is essentially an organizational self-assessment that you can use. So as an examiner, you go through some really detailed education on performance excellence and how to evaluate a process and how to evaluate integration for an organization. And so here, what we're trying to do to help application writers is to understand what it is that examiners are going to be looking for and kind of put you in their mindset so that you can do a better job of communicating to them in order to allow them to help you, because guess what? The flip side of the coin is you are their customer. And the feedback report that they write, they go through a lot of effort in order to concisely provide you with the best feedback that they can, that will be actionable by you and that is appropriate for where you are in your organizational journey. So we'd like to start with using the scoring guidelines, and if you have a criteria book, Baldrige criteria book in front of you, this is taken right out of the process scoring part for the 70 to 85% scoring range. And we coach people to say, always shoot for that 70 to 85% scoring range in your efforts of designing your processes, managing your processes, and improving your processes. Because our experience is that if there's never been an organization that scored 70 to 85% in all 17 items, number one, but the highest score that's ever been attained by any Baldrige National Award winner is 812. And that was the first year of the program. So we look to this as this is truly the definition of excellence, if you will, that we're shooting for in managing our organizations and leading them. So when we look at approach, the definition there in the scoring guidelines is there's an effective, systematic approach responsible to multiple questions. So how is it that examiners evaluate the term effective? And it's pretty simple. It's does this process or measure address what it's supposed to do? Does it produce the product that it's supposed to produce in a high quality way? Does it meet the requirements and expectations of the customer of that process? Systematic, we talked just a minute ago about the definition of systematic. It's well ordered, repeatable, and uses data and information so that learning is possible. When we get to the D of ADLI or ADLI, it's how broadly and deeply this approach or this process is used within the organization. And what's always important at the end of each of these is as appropriate. Is it absolutely required by any of the criteria that you do the exact same thing, the exact same way in all parts of the organization for all the different people? The answer is absolutely not. There's no requirement for that. What the requirement is that the process be deployed throughout the organization as appropriate. And you as the organization get to decide what is and is not appropriate. Okay, so if there is variability, that's fine. And is it okay to pilot a new process? Because it's always a question that comes up with application writers that says, hey, we've been doing this process the same way for the past 6 years. We've got good results, but then we came up with this improvement and we want to improve it. And we're starting to get good results from the improvement that we did, but we're afraid to put it into our application because we don't have years of data behind it as to what the results are. And we're afraid the examiners are going to say it's in the early stages of deployment and then we won't score as well. Well, again, as appropriate, when you explain those things to the examiners, they take that into consideration and assess you accordingly. On
So
the learning
learning-
side, okay, go ahead, Denise, I'm sorry.
Learning has this, it has a little bigger definition, and quite honestly, it's one of the ones that organizations struggle with and frequently score a little bit lower, at least before the site visit. We'll talk about more about that when we get to some of the tips, but it's really got to be fact-based, and learning involves evaluation and improvement as appropriate. Really looking for some of that innovation and new ways of doing things. And again, that efficiency and effectiveness comes up. So how do you evaluate processes? Do you need results for everything? Absolutely not. You don't have that much room in an application, but pick the key things, the things that are really important. Innovation in Baldrige has a little bit different definition than what we have maybe in everyday language. They're really looking for those changes in processes that kind of bent the trend. I call it putting the elbow in the graph because I have a medical background. But where your trend line is maybe going straight and now all of a sudden it bends because of something you did. Be sure and capture that for your organization to celebrate as well as to put into your application. And then that sharing in terms of what the programs are looking for is not only externally when you get on the platform with the recognition, but also internally in your organization. How do you identify those areas of your organization, those segments, if you will, that have the highest performance, and share internally to improve your performance as well? Integration, we talked about. This is really about looking at your current and future organizational needs. And how do they know that? You told them. You told the examiners in your profile what's important to you. You told them what some of your future challenges are. Your strategic plan, or at least an excerpt of it, is in your application, so they know where you're headed. So all of this should really be focused on moving you towards your organizational vision. Sterling also added a second eye into the evaluation criteria that's not in Baldrige, and that is the importance. This really goes right along with that integration and what you said in your profile that become your key business factors. What are the things that are really important to your organization? So if you identified a key customer requirement, the expectation is that you are somehow evaluating whether that requirement's been met. If your competitive environment is really hot right now, that may make some changes in the way that you do things. Certainly, I think almost everybody, as we emerge, hopefully, from the pandemic, has some workforce needs. So it's all those things that you said were important to your organization. And this second eye of the importance also helps to really promote that integration piece. And helps the organization, hopefully, to focus on what's important to them, not just maybe what's urgent right now. So one of the hints that we offer up is to really build your successful organization first, and then capture the image of it in the application. So work on these improvements. One of the big bonuses, if you embrace it as such, of writing an application and trying to pull all this together, even without the page limit, is it's a great self-assessment. You can identify where your own gaps are and start to close them, capture those as your cycles of evaluation and improvement. This is a great process to evaluate your organization and improve it overall.
So the first steps are start with the organizational profile, and essentially, and these are our words, not the profile words themselves out of the criteria, but the profile describes who you are and what it is that you do, and from your perspective as an organization, what's important to you, and it describes for the examiners in particular what operating environment you find yourself in as an organization. So to understand the context of the organization, essentially the examiners get those front 5 pages, the organizational profile, in order to set the lenses, if you will, that they are going to use through their assessment process. I guess another way would be put to get their heads into your organization so that they are better equipped and better able to provide you with actionable feedback that you find valuable. And kind of most importantly, I think in the profile is, this is where you define what is key to your organization and subliminally what is not. And I know, in some organizations, it's really, really difficult at this stage to figure out the answer to that very first question in the profile, which is, what are your main products and services? And when you, especially in the healthcare, we typically will see with healthcare organization that, well, we have 38 different specialties, and here's the long list of what all of those are. Well, we know those are all important, but is each specialty key to the success of the organization? And this is where it takes some leadership discussion and understanding of the criteria, and maybe it's not just the 38 specialties, but maybe it's inpatient, outpatient, and emergency, and home care. Maybe those are the 4 key service lines that the hospital provides.
So we're big proponents. We actually kind of changed the model of the criteria, the framework a little bit for organizations that are building it. So it starts on that platform of the organizational profile. And then within that context, within the context that's been set in the profile, where should we aim to go? So the next piece that we advocate you really tie together is your strategy, which is category 2. And then engage everybody in moving toward that desired future state. This will help you to figure out your priorities for your organization, allocate your resources, and really, no kidding, start moving your organization toward performance excellence. Category 2, the strategy, is all about change. We firmly believe in our strategic planning that we do that there should be nothing about maintaining the status quo in the strategic plan. It should be all about changing you and moving you towards your vision. So an effective strategy should really begin to create that alignment and integration of everything. The entire workforce should be looking to the mission, vision, and values. All of that should be customer focused. And this is where you really begin to create that integration in your application. So addressing all of the identified strategic challenges, really how you evaluate those strategic opportunities to see if they're intelligent risk and whether you should capitalize on them or let them go. How do you leverage those strategic advantages and the core competencies, all of the things that are listed here. The last bullet is one that is not in the framework, but we're big proponents. It actually came out of Coral Springs when they were an award recipient a number of years ago. And that's figuring out what are your key intended outcomes. You're exchanging resources to do something. What do you hope to accomplish? What do you hope to get out of those resources you've invested? And take a moment to kind of pause and figure out, what are we really trying to accomplish? What's our key intended outcome? And then go from there to your measures. It may actually change how you choose your metrics, how you measure things, where that data comes from. And sometimes it helps to really get everybody on board with the why you're making the change, why you're doing whatever it is that you're hoping to accomplish with your strategy.
The next building block that we talk about is category 4. So once the strategy is in place, then it comes down to making sure that we're able to measure how well we're accomplishing our strategy, how well that strategy is being deployed, and understanding that the measures that we use are going to, in fact, drive the behaviors of the organization. So we kind of titled this one, first a little side trip down measurement alley to understand that from the criteria definitions, the criteria states that it does not distinguish between the term measure and indicator, but it does give a little bit of a description of some differences between the two. And that is, a measure is a measure. It's how far you went, or how much time you took, or how many people are in place, or how many dollars of sales that you had. An indicator is something that relates to performance, but doesn't measure it directly. So things like customer complaints is an indicator of customer satisfaction, but it's not the measure of satisfaction itself. And then another term that's not in the criteria itself, but is commonly used in most organizations, is metric. And essentially, in my short soldier language, it's when you put two measures together to put it in context. So speed is miles per hour. So that's two different measures, miles and time. And when you put them together and relate them to each other, it gives you miles per hour, and that's your speed. So in taking from the key intended outcomes, starting there from your strategy, the question is okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. What's the best way of measuring success in getting there. And that's where your key performance measures or KPMs or KPIs, key performance indicators, come from. We encourage folks to have both the change the business, we want to achieve a particular thing, and then run the business, how effective and how efficient and how safe we're operating our organization. And we'll just tell you that the metrics that you pick will dictate what measures you need, and that the measures that you use will absolutely drive the behavior of the organization, and the behaviors of the people within the organization is what creates your actual performance levels. And so we kind of stress this by saying, make no mistake about this whatsoever. The measures that you choose will drive the actions and performance of your people. And if you choose good metrics and good measures, that will help. If you choose the wrong ones, that will hurt you. And so choose wisely in the process. So some key examples of that, some measures. We had sales of $100 million. We had 100,000 customers. What's that mean? When comparing your performance to someone else, if you're in a car dealership and you say, hey, we sold 1,000 cars this year, I don't know what that means as an examiner, other than it's a number. If you don't give me a comparison of your sales to a comparable organization, there's no way for me as an examiner to evaluate how well you are doing. So when we start putting it into metrics, now we have sales per customer or revenue per employee. That's now something that I can compare, or you can compare as an organization yourself to someone else or some other comparable organization. And then indicators, there's some examples there of repeat customers and willingness to recommend. So we just kind of laid out a quick one-page KIO example, key intended outcome example of becoming the market leader. Well, what measures do we want to use? We might use sales and revenue. We might use the volume of how many cars we sold, or how many graduates we had, or how many customers came through. And then metric wise, if we want to be the market leader, it's kind of self-explanatory there that you got to know what your market share is. If you don't know what your market share is and you can't figure it out, then it's going to be hard for you to evaluate as to whether or not you are achieving your goal of being the market leader.
So an effective measurement system should really promote that whole management by fact. It's a constant quest for having this data, and like the criteria said, how do you ensure they're valid, they're reliable, they're timely, they're accurate? We're proponents of it's called the DIKW, which is take that data and analyze it to convert it into information. And then as you begin to use that data to guide decision-making and everything else, that becomes personal and organizational knowledge. And then add the judgment and the insight and involve the other stakeholders, and that becomes wisdom. And this does help to provide both stability for your organization. It's data-based, evidence-based decision-making, and also agility, because when the measures, or in fact, even the trends begin to project that you're not headed where you want to go, it informs you that you need to make some changes. So it's both that stability and agility balance. And again, liking the Baldrige community, liking acronyms so much, we find many organizations that are DRIP, which is they're data rich, but they're information poor because they have so much data that they haven't really distilled that or analyzed that into information that they can use. So those measures that are there in category 4, both your change the business, which come out of your strategic plan, you run the business, which are kind of those things you need to be monitoring and evaluating on an ongoing basis, become the driver for effective operations, which is category 6. And this is that focus on improvements. It's really making sure that everything that you're measuring, everything that you're analyzing does have some venue where it gets reviewed. So the measures actually matter to the organization. People know that leadership is looking at them. They should also be helping you to prioritize and commit your resources for improvement activities. And then also don't ignore the fact, just like Baldrige gives strengths and OFIs, that you reward and recognize those high performers, share those strong practices within your organization. That also gets you in the habit of being able to describe them well, not get too concerned about being too humble, but also be able to very concisely talk about where your areas of strength are, and put you, kind of gives you some practice for the platform. So again, your effective operations should really be looking at efficiency, at effectiveness, at being economical and safe. Those are the big ones that we really are proponents of kind of measuring across all of those in order to make sure that the process is doing what you want the process to do. It should, like I mentioned, combine the run the business, those things that maybe you have to report to somebody or that are typical for the industry, measures of success, as well as your change the business measures that come out of your strategic plan. Sometimes you do have needs that vary across different parts of the organization. Sometimes some need to slow down in terms of improvement in order to let another part of the organization utilize the resources to help them to catch up. You always have some variability or some balance that needs to be made between your own organization cost control and efficiency for your longer term operations, and also meeting those customer requirements and exceeding expectations as you move into the future and make sure that you can maintain your customer base. Again, measures really drive all of that. Then building your leadership on that solid platform across categories 2, 4, and 6 really helps organizations to excel, because the leaders now have evidence-based decision-making, they have fact-based decision-making on how to allocate the resources that they have available. And when we talk about resources, we're not just talking about budget, we're not just talking about people, we're also talking about space, we're also talking about ideas. And that's one that is highly overlooked or frequently overlooked as a resource, is bringing people together for those conversations, not reading reports to each other, but really talking about what the data mean, getting up that data information, knowledge, wisdom scale or hierarchy to really be able to utilize all of those resources in order to achieve that balance. And this is again where that integration piece comes from, is that balance that you're continually assessing in category 6. And that's really the big goal of leadership.
So when you go through category 1, it asks you a whole bunch of questions, but the very first question that it asks is, how does senior leaders set and deploy the organization vision values through its leadership system? So we need to make sure that in the application writing that we're covering how the organizations do this, because as an applicant writer or an application writer, you're able to clearly communicate how your leadership does what it is that they do. That allows other organizations to look at how you do things and then be able to emulate them as appropriate or modify them as they see fit in order to help them become better leaders and achieve performance excellence from their perspective. And so here, again, we're not going to read through these, but it's just a list of things that we want you to be able to use as a resource to make sure that as you're writing your application, that you're able to cover all of these and make sure that you do a thorough job of explaining how it is that you do these things that leadership does. So in building upon the rest of our little pyramid here, those effective operations also empower the workforce and foster workforce engagement. There's the definition of it from Baldrige, but it also helps reduce the silos and making sure that every individual in the organization is able to, clearly see, a clear line of sight from what it is that they do, how that contributes to the success of the organization. And it kind of goes back to, what Denise mentioned earlier is what's in it for me ought to be good for my customer, and what's good for my customer ought to be good for my organization. And that works both going from top to bottom and from bottom to top. And then at the end of it, everything that we are doing is designed to support the customer experience, because that's what our organization does.
So we want to actually get into some real tips about the writing process to put your application together. So one of the big hints is always remember systematic. Keep it right forefront in your mind, and remember that examiners are looking for approach, deployment, learning, and integration, which all revolve around being systematic. It's difficult to capture that in the application because the application is just a snapshot. So think about more writing, instead of a snapshot, writing a travel diary and telling some journey. This is where we've been, this is where we are, and this is where we're going, in a very concise manner. And remember, except for, category 2, where we're going doesn't really score you any points. So you certainly can talk about where you're headed, but for the most part, don't be talking about this is what we plan to do, because that's not going to get you any points. One of the big tips we have in putting an application together this way is, instead of writing about Adley, write about Lady. Put the learning and integration first. We used to do this, but based on this mechanism of evaluating that approach, we're now doing it this way. And in some areas, we may do it a little bit differently because, for instance, volunteers are not engaged based on how much money you pay them. So therefore, that becomes our segmentation in these results that we've shown back in this other figure. If you can, instead of, just to save space, what we generally try to do is incorporate the criteria into the sentence and use a bold font. That helps you ensure that you addressed all the criteria, and you don't need the whole criteria sentence, just a word or two. Lets the examiners know that this is what we're talking about, and then we put it in bold text. The other thing that this does for you as a writer is to show that if you've got a whole bunch of text without any bold, that you've used criteria language, you may be going on and on about something that would be better, that's just an example, and it would just be better maybe condensed a little bit to save you some space.
So here's an example of what Denise was just describing. And again, we're not going to read this to you. You can, absorb it yourself. But the key takeaways from here are it uses that learning approach, deployment, and integration piece, or layout structure, if you will. And the bold text that you see there is criteria language, with the exception of annual. And that's just, it's a couple of sentences to show this approach for writing a response to a criteria question.
So one of the other things is really stick to the processes. Examples should just illustrate the point, not be the point. We also talk about name it and claim it, which is just, here's what we do, but it doesn't really tell you how. So again, go back and evaluate. If I read what I just wrote and I was from another organization, would I be able to go do something similar? If you say we protect our data using our cybersecurity process, I don't know what that is. I can't really emulate it. And in the Baldrige community evaluation, that's really not going to get you any points. So we also advocate for using a lot of flow diagrams or step-by-step descriptions. They'll help you to actually make sure that you're describing a process and that somebody else could pick up what you're putting down. We also talk some about RAGs, and we see these in a lot of organizations. They're random acts of goodness. They are good, they are random, and random is not systematic. So again, a flow diagram without the bunny in the hat, where magic happens, is really where you want to go with this. Really talk about what's your feedback, what's your evaluation, how do you use the data and information to make sure that your process is evaluated on a regular basis. And then go back and read what you wrote, or trade papers with your partner. Have somebody else read what you wrote and say, based on what is here, is the key intended outcome identifiable? Do we have results for that? Could somebody take it and do what you described or something similar to that for their own organization? And this is where you really get into that systematic and that tight integration between your processes and the results that you're going to put in your application. So this is a concept that we got from Bob when we presented this at the conference. We love it. Your application creates examiner expectations. So if you prominently show this rifle, you better talk about it. You've set it up in the examiner's brains as something that they could probably be looking for. So this is an example out of the 2020 case study. Just based on these things that were in a few pages of the profile, you're going to expect as an examiner to see lives saved, lives improved, what those national performance standards are. The comparative data, we're going to expect to see a lot of it because we rely on this sharing through collaboration. Results and descriptions about a positive experience for the donor family, the educational offerings, the timeliness of the introduction, etc. So again, everything that you write, especially in the profile, is really creating those expectations for what the examiner is going to see in the processes and in the results. So make sure that you deliver on your promise. I personally, as an examiner, I use a purple highlighter as I go through an application. And all these things that would make me expect to see results or potentially expect to see results, I highlight in purple so that I can go back later and see if they really are there. Understanding, of course, that applications are page limited, and so not everything's going to be able to be there. But if it's a key expectation for this result, I would expect to see it.
So one thing to really keep in mind as an application writer is that every single question that is in the organizational profile has a long string attached to it that goes all the way back to category 7 in the results. So we just put one example up here really quickly. P1A3, what are the key drivers that engage your workforce? Well, later on in category 5, it's going to ask you, well, how do you determine those key drivers? So it's going to look for that process that you use to determine your key drivers of workforce engagement. And then later in category 7, item 7.3, it's going to ask you, well, what are the results for your workforce engagement? And how do those differ by your workforce segments? Well, where do the workforce segments come from? Workforce segments came again from the organizational profile, where it says, what is your workforce profile? And you identified all of the different segments in the organization.
So these next 3 slides, we're not gonna even spend time on, but we wanted you to, you have these as a handout. These are some key ones that we've identified out of the current criteria for that alignment, just for you to see kind of how that alignment works and help you maybe present a little better alignment or consider alignment as you're putting an application together. So all this kind of moves toward identifying those results to include. How do you go about doing that? Well, hopefully this key factor map will help you to do that, but go back and read your own, get your own. It doesn't even have to be purple, but get your own highlighter and start highlighting all those rifles that you see on the wall that says, we've got this, and then figure out which ones you need to put in that are the most important. So again, integration is one of the evaluation factors, both in processes and results, because this is really looking where you kind of tie things together with the organization.
And then the
In
rest
results,
of,
we also, in addition to integration, we talk about levels and trends and comparisons. And there is an expectation, again, at that 70 to 85%, that you will have current performance, that you'll have some meaningful measurement scale, which takes you back to those key intended outcomes, that you're showing enough of a trend line. And if something is new to your organization, by all means, show the trend for quarters instead of years, or for months instead of years, just so that you can see, or the examiner can see, that slope of those data points over time. And then a lot of organizations really do struggle over comparisons, and that's where the discussion earlier about the metrics will help you. You don't have to find an exact same organization, but they should be valid comparisons.
okay, I'm sorry. In putting the application together, many organizations will assign usually a senior leader to be what they call a category champion for the organization. And that person kind of oversees the writing of that particular category within the application. And when you go that route, you end up with 7 category champions. We advocate that you only have 6, and the 6 be the process category champions, and that each process category champion takes ownership and responsibility for the associated results of the organization. And the reason that we advocate it this way is we have seen in organizations where the process category champions write these wonderful processes and describe all of these great things, but then there's no data behind it. There's no performance results behind it. And the poor category 7 champion is left there holding the bag because that's kind of done usually at the end of the application writing process. And it just creates consternation, if you will, or challenges to tie the application together fully. So we advocate, again, back to key intended outcomes, that every process ought to have one, whether you describe it or not. But in your mind, in the in category 6, that first question of how do you design, manage, and improve your processes? Well, key intended outcome ought to be an important part of that. So other things that are important is to make sure that you know how that data is going to be obtained. If it is resident within the organization, that's great. If it's not, who's going to get it? Where are you going to find it from? Is it comparative data? Is it normalized data? Is it average data? Is it benchmarkable data? How is it that you're going to present these various elements of the data, especially in comparisons, so that you can communicate your story thoroughly to the examiners?
So we also are big proponents of what we call the 3 R's, which is rates, ratios, and rankings. Not big fans of seeing measures of volume in an application, although sometimes that's the easiest thing to come up with. Rankings is the best because your comparisons are built into those. If you've got a percentile, if you can find out if you're top decile, top quartile, whatever that is, certainly the rates and the ratios are better than simply volumes. This is where, again, you come up with what's really important to the organization and then how you're going to present it. The problem with volumes is that they don't normalize anything, so you really can't compare. All of this is about delivering on the expectations, and this is where the alignment and integration across the application really come into play. So your results should be associated with the processes that you've described. Doug and I have both seen many organizations that pick results that make them look good at the time. And that is not going to get you into the higher levels of maturity, the higher scoring guidelines, if they're not associated with what you said was important. Your processes and your categories, 1 through 6, you talked about how you evaluate that process. So show those results. If you can come up with a result where you've got some innovation, you've got an elbow in your graph, put a call out box in there as to what you did there. That will help to show back to the processes that your evaluation and improvement process actually works. Remember that results are going to lag the processes, and the processes produce those results, and get the two of those pretty well married up as much as you possibly can.
I remember on the expectations part, we pretty much started our presentation with that is where do the examiners get their expectations? Well, they get them from you. It's the information that you present up there in that profile and through the processes that create the expectations for the results by the examiners. So here's just one example from category 5 or item 5.1. It talks about the workplace environment. And in this case, the applicant said the measures that we use are OSHA compliance, and you can find those in 7.3-7. Well, the examiner is going to flip back to 7.3-7 and say, all right, wait, this is DART rate. And while DART rate is a OSHA measure, it's not a compliance measure. And so we don't have an equal here. But even at that, the examiners are still going to evaluate what results you did provide to them. And the opportunity here is, okay, you were at 0 in 2016. You had a pretty significant bump up to, it looks like about 1 in 2017, and then you're back to 2018. Well, what happened? And so that's where we're able to use some of the narrative portion of the category 7 items to explain just what happened to you. So here's another example of where desired date is a key requirement for the customers, and here's the results that the organization has in figure 7.222. But then there's an explanatory note that says, unlike regular cemeteries, services at a VA cemetery are held in a committal shelter, which may or may not be available at the requested date or time. So it's just an explanation to kind of clarify any questions that the examiners may have while they're looking through it.
So again, Doug mentioned earlier that the examiners are your customers, you're the examiner's customers. So it's one of these wonderful cycles. The key takeaway from that is be examiner friendly as much as you can in the presentation of the results. Try to be very consistent. Usually graphs are presented with the oldest data on the left and the newest data on the right. We are also big advocates of whoever we're bars, the comparisons are lines. Segments should be similarly colored from one graph to the next. Competitors should be similarly colored, just to make it really easy for the examiner, who, remember, is volunteering their time to help you, make sure that it's easy for them to interpret. Be very clear, putting in either the direction of good, or actually the next iteration of the Baldrige criteria is going to introduce an alternate graph that has upper and lower control limits, so that if you have variability, but if it's all within control, that it's all fine. Don't make them too busy to read, and again, use those call outs as appropriate. So here's an example. This is one that is for healthcare. Now, one of the issues with this one is that you'll notice the bar on the scale on the left, it goes above 100%. You really can't get up above 100%. So consider just making this 100% be your top. Good is better. You've got your trends across time. You've got a projection in there. You've got segmentation, you've got your comparisons that are lines that correspond with the colors. So again, it's easy to interpret. Any text that you put in category 7 should be really about explaining the results. So again, not going to read this to you, but you know, as much as you can, any interpretation, anything that an examiner, particularly not one from your sector, might not understand, any linkages that you have back to the process categories. Also, if you've got many times, and I know in healthcare this is true, we can segment employee engagement survey every which way to Sunday. We can't put all that in an application. So even just putting the additional segmentation that's available and telling the examiners that you'll show them all that or demonstrate it when they get to the site. So we've, in the chat box, we've given you that full key factor map. We've also given you what we wrote. I'm from Akron, Ohio, which is where the all of the 12-step AA programs got started. So we wrote one a little bit tongue-in-cheek of a 12-step program to help you with writing your application called Addicted to Quality. Those are in the chat window. And then we also, I think our last slide is just our contact information. And again, like I said, we encourage you to contact us if you have a question, even something that comes up later. We are always willing to help. Probably email or texting a convenient time for a call is the best way to reach us. But we are here to answer your questions starting right now.
Thank you. That was really interesting information. I like the information about making sure that we focus on systematic. We don't want to be rags, right? They talked about those random acts of goodness. They also gave us this tip on how to structure our comments using laddie or lady. And then again, and of course, we don't want to be a drip. That is data rich and information poor. So use those 3 R's to try to get the point across to examiners that you have indeed linked or integrated your process items and your results. After all, the criteria are there to, at the end of the day, we're trying to produce a certain result. So at this time, we'd like to take questions. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? You could either put it in the chat or take the opportunity to unmute. I don't know if you have that opportunity or not. Very nice. So Doug and Denise, I had a question about the results section, and you were saying that at some point there's a limit, page limit on how many results you can put in there. How do you decide which results that you're going to place in the application versus which you're going to say, well, those results are available on site?
Yeah, I'll
So-
go ahead and take a stab at it.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, thanks. The 1 3-letter word key just really pops up in the answer to most of our questions. What is key? So if we said we have 5 different customer groups, as an examiner, I'm going to look for results for 5 customer groups. If we said there's 3 major markets, I'm going to look for 3 major markets. If we said that there's 3 major services, but 38 service lines, I'm going to look for results for some of those 38. And quite frankly, you know, at the end of the day, there's an award involved and we want to win. And so we will put those results forward that I don't want to say cherry picking, but that show us in the best light possible, but at the same time is an honest depiction of how the organization is performing. So include some, that segmentation, especially if you have a whole bunch of segments, show the main ones, show the key ones, and Baldrige kind of defines key as around 5 or less. And in doing so, if you're not able to put them all and you put, hey, the rest is all available on site, it lets the examiners know that they are able to see across the spectrum of what you have. You do segmentation of your data. That's an important thing just from a process management perspective, is that you're looking at your data through the different possible slices in order to get the best information possible.
Thank you. And I noticed Doug and Denise have put up their contact information on there. I've known Doug and Denise for 20 years. They are here to help. When they say, please let us know if you have any questions, no kidding, they mean that. If you ask them a question, they're not going to sick 20 or 30 salespeople on you. They really are here to help.
We don't have 20 or 30 sales.
Bob,
We
this is
don't
Dion.
have one salespeople.
Bob,
I
this
just
is-
want to tag on and Dion, I know that you have something you
Right.
wanted to say too, but I just want to tag on to what Doug was saying with the answer to that question. We really believe wholeheartedly in the notion of the key intended outcomes. And as you're going through your processes, even as you're describing them in your application, when you're thinking about what are those key intended outcomes, that will help you to identify the key measures, the key results that you're going to include in your application. So if your key intended outcome, say of your hiring process, is to get or keep all of your positions filled with well-qualified people, that leads you down a little bit different path, maybe than even just cycle time. Or, you know, it really is about the qualified individuals, and it leads you into your vacancy rate, you know, and so it sometimes just taking a little bit of a pause and say, what are we really, at the end of the day, at the end of the process, what are we trying to accomplish here? Sometimes leads you to a little bit different measure, but it certainly helps you pinpoint which ones are key. And then, like Doug said, as an examiner, I'm just saying, you know what, I don't need to see every which way that you can slice all of this data, but tell me all the ways that you slice this data, how you use that for your analysis. And then if I want to explore it further, it's frequently even better as a demonstration on site than throwing a whole bunch of data at me. But give me the key ones, the key segments that you said were your key segments back in the profile. And that helps with that integration too.
Thank you.
So,
Norma and Dion, did you have something you wanted
Well,
to
I
add?
just, y'all did first of all, I think y'all did a wonderful job, and thank you for helping to explain this in a way that I think all of us can understand, because it is a lot to comprehend when you're going through an assessment and completing an application. But one of the things that we focus a lot on, and I know you did talk about this during your presentation, is the importance of the organizational profile and the key factors, and how that really is the starting point for a well-written application. Can you just talk about that a little bit more and share your insights on the importance of that organizational profile as part of the application?
Sure, that's actually, Dion, why we came up with the key factor map. Doug and I we had one year that between the two of us, we actually reviewed, we had over 100 applications in our hands. In the capacity of an examiner, of a judge, of a program administrator, or of whatever, and we needed to get as efficient and effective as possible in our review, and that's when we came up with that key factor map, and really looking at those key factors. And the best example I can give, these were actually a couple of clients that we had. We had one client that had 39 employees. They were in Texas. And when they wanted to have, when the leader of the organization wanted to have a chat, he said, don't anybody bring your lunch tomorrow. I'm going to spring for barbecue. We're going to meet over lunch, and all 40 of us are going to chat about whatever the topic was. For them, that was an effective communication piece. And that was how they communicated those key decisions. We also worked with Lockheed Martin Missiles and Fire Control when they were an award recipient, and they had, I don't remember how many tens of thousands of employees covering every time zone in the United States. You can't invite them all in for a barbecue to say, hey, we're going to talk about this important decision. So that profile tells the examiners what they should reasonably expect from your organization, what makes you unique, what makes you different. And it helps the examiners understand kind of who you are, what you do, where you're coming from, what's important to you, etc. I was on a site visit on one national level application that said in the profile that it was a hospital, their main service lines were cardiology and orthopedics. And we get there and we find out that the majority of their patients came in through same-day surgery, not for cardiac or orthopedics. Their rest of their patients came in through the emergency department. Some of them were from cardiac or orthopedics. But when we started digging down into this main service lines, there was no rational basis for them to say that cardiac and orthopedics were their main service lines. They chose those because those were performing well at the time. And it became increasingly obvious as we went through the site visit that those service lines were chosen because they were performing well. Many of the others had issues. And as an examiner team, we became much more interested in how they were resolving the issues in the other service lines than you know, and why cardiology and orthopedics were performing so well, so that they could share it internally. And it was a real eye-opener for them that the profile really is important, and it should all have some sort of basis in fact, because that's what you're going to evaluate as an examiner. That's what you're going to evaluate the organization on, what they said. Does that help?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know when it comes to any of our Sterling assessments, every one of them starts with an organizational profile, even if we don't do an application, because that's really important that we understand what's most relevant. Gordon, were you going to say something? I don't know that we have any other questions, Bob. I mean, I think everyone has really enjoyed this session though. And
Dion,
yes.
this is Barbara Arnold. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Barbara, go ahead, please.
Just a little more basic question. I was reviewing the Addicted to Quality handout, and it talks about determining which software program you'll use for the application. Do you have any, I mean, honestly, I'm mainly just familiar with Word. Can you give me some ideas of what other tools are out there?
By the way, if you're part of the Sterling program, we do have an online application that you will be a part of. And clearly, we don't ask you to format or put an application together in the traditional Baldrige sense. So, and we are, by the way, if you're going to be a Sterling applicant in early September, we're doing a session to help applicants understand the application process in the online system. So I would encourage you just to do things in Word and tables and what you normally do. And we'll give you guidance in terms of how you would upload and what kind of and ways you basically save documents as either PNGs or different ways that we ask you to save things and upload. But we will go through a whole session with any of our applicants. We're going to be advertising that pretty soon, probably in the next, as soon as we get your application of intent or hear from you, we will make you aware of this session. But we will be going through and doing a session just for our applicants this year to understand how to really put together an application and how to use the software as part of that application process.
Great, great. So we can just go ahead and start working on putting our
Absolutely. And we encourage you to start. I mean, the key, I think, is really taking the tips that the team has shared today, and that is to focus on those processes and getting things clearly understood and documented, and looking at your effective and systematic and how you describe things. Because again, one of the comments that I loved, Barbara, was even the comment they made around example should illustrate the point, not be the point. We're going to be focusing this year at Sterling on making sure we understand your key business processes. And that's going to be where you need to spend a lot of your time on the front end, and then give us some of those examples and further develop that, but get to the basics first. And we will, again, any questions anyone has related to the application process, again, contact Sterling, but we will be doing a Zoom training session on how to really submit the application and the tips and techniques in doing that effectively.
I can just
For the
tag on.
National Baldrige program is also headed that direction as well. They want to take some of the difficulties of producing that 50-page application out of the mix as much as possible, and just make it easier. Now, as we mentioned during the presentation, Doug and I are big proponents of flow diagramming your processes, because that automatically is well ordered and repeatable. And it makes it easy. Now, we're not big proponents of pull the bunny out of the hat step. There shouldn't be any black hats with bunnies hiding in them, but you know, and we also are big proponents of there should be some feedback loop, so that forces you into how and where in the process we build in evaluation, so that we can go back for a cycle of improvement to the process. A lot of organizations will use their, and we're in the Microsoft suite, but even in Google Docs, those flow diagrams are a lot easier to build in PowerPoint or Visio type
Mhm.
programs than what they are in Word, and then bring them in as pictures. If you do need to do a lot of documentation, we usually use Word. We know some places will use Publisher. And then if there's something that you really need to stabilize, then go ahead and print it to a PDF.
And if I can add just one more thing onto a point that Dion made regarding getting your application started. There, we found in the, I guess now between Denise and I, 43 years of being on the national board, that there are basically two types of applications. There are the ones that perfectly describe the organization and all of its processes and its results and the things that are important. And then there are the ones that actually get submitted. So getting started is a key and essential step. And we encourage you to do that soon.
That's a great story. I do want to piggyback on what Denise is saying. I think the charts, the graphs, the flow charts, I can't overemphasize the importance of those visual pieces of the application for not only you to make sure that you're able to describe and see the systematic and the flow of how you do things, but for the examiners. It is that, you know, we always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And again, a graph, a chart, a table, describing some of your processes and practices and is really worth a lot, you know, when it comes to helping the examiners understand things.
One of the other questions that has come up actually from a lot of clients, and we try really hard not to laugh, but they're very serious when they ask, is that once we pull it all together, can we improve anything? Can we change anything before the examiners come, or before the examiners, you know, if there's going to be a site visit? Because organizations get concerned that they're going to be seen as putting something in the application that is not true. And whether that's you're describing something that you're currently building, or whether that's you've described something and now you want to change it before the examiners come. I think throughout the Baldrige community, all of the state programs, change is fine. We expect change, we embrace change, and all that. So if you have a process that you are in the process of changing and you know what the process is going to be, like let's say we're rolling out a new survey tool next week, go ahead and describe that, put it in there. It may not be fully deployed yet, but it's your cycle of learning that you had based on some evaluation. Certainly once the application is submitted, application writing is a huge benefit to the organization as a self-assessment. And as you go through and you respond to the criteria, you'll identify your own gaps. And that relates back to what Doug was saying about there's perfect ones and there's ones that get submitted. Don't wait until you have everything all perfect and all done to submit. Go ahead and submit, but then go ahead and change. Just remember to capture why you made that change and evaluate that the change was actually an improvement. One of the things that I say, I'm kind of in my family, the keeper of all of the old photographs from the family ancestry. And I always tell people, you know, I know that those people standing in that picture knew exactly who they were when that picture was taken. But it takes a lot of research now for me to go back and figure out who they all were. And if they would have only made some note at the time, because back then pictures were all just printed, if they would have all made some notation at the time, of who they were, it would have saved me a lot of work. So as you're going through this process, make sure that you as an organization keep track of your improvements that you've made, when you made them, why you made them, not only to celebrate with your organization that you're agile and you're making changes and you're constantly improving, but also to be able to capture those as your call out boxes in your results or in your descriptions in your process categories, for the improvements that you've made and how you evaluate your processes.
As we continue our question and answer period, and I know I'm learning a lot through other people's questions. I always do in the examples provided. But I have pushed out a link to a very short survey on providing us feedback on today's session. It's actually 2 questions and 1 comment box. So please click on the link and provide us your feedback for today.
Very good. If there are no further questions, we'll give you some time back.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bob, and please complete the survey and provide us the feedback. But thank you, Denise and Doug. I think it was a very enlightening presentation. Your examples were great. And I really appreciate everyone's attention and just really focus on this, because this is a way to really begin to improve as organizations in Florida and Georgia. So thank you for your attention and thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And we mean it. Give us a call. Don't get stuck on anything. Give us a
Thank
call,
you,
send us a
Doug.
text. Yep.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Denise. That's great to offer that help and those basic questions people might have. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
Have a
great day.
nice day.